There's been a lot of anti-Asian hate in America recently, and Stop Anti-Asian Hate was trending online, and Rihanna even showed up at an Asian hate protest, or rather an anti-Asian hate protest. It's interesting that consistently the phenomenon is referred to as anti-Asian hate rather than anti-Asian racism. I would have thought if you're hating someone because they're Asian, you're hating them because of their race, and therefore you're a racist. Well, maybe not. But who's to blame for this rise in anti-Asian hatred? And there has been an increase statistically in the number of anti-Asian attacks in America over the past 12 months. And like most bad things in the world, Donald Trump gets some of the blame. A lot of his anti-China rhetoric is being pointed to as a reason for this increase. We know that he blamed China for the health crisis that we are suffering at the moment, although we're coming out the other side of it apparently, which is good. And in the mainstream media, we hear a lot about the terrible things that China does to its population, and we're hearing about the horrible way they apparently treat Muslims in China, and we can talk about that in another video. But if all this information, all this anti-Chinese rhetoric is being absorbed by the masses, then who is carrying out the anti-Asian hate crimes, the physical attacks? It's one thing to have a negative idea about a certain race of people, and it's another to actually act upon that hatred. And this is where we get the difference between prejudice and discrimination, when you actually act upon the attitude that you have towards someone. Now, typically, when you think of a racist, I know you're probably thinking of a white person, probably thinking of a white male, maybe a young white male like Robert Aaron Long, who was responsible for the shootings in Atlanta that led to the deaths of several Asian American women. But because he killed a couple of white women as well, it was apparently not a hate crime, and was maybe more some kind of sexual deviancy that led him to seek out these women and kill them, presumably a hate crime based on gender rather than race. So that was a high-profile case that was thought to be an example of anti-Asian hate, but it was dismissed as such. So who is committing, or who is being found guilty of committing these anti-Asian hate crimes, of which there's been a wave of in the last 12 months? Well, let's have a look at some statistics. I've got an article from VOA News. Anti-Asian hate crime crosses racial and ethnic lines. So this is focusing on New York in particular, so we can't necessarily translate that right across America, but it's just a little interesting insight to the breakdown of anti-Asian hate crimes in a particular city in America. A hate crime is defined by the FBI as a criminal offence motivated by bias against the victim's race, religion, disability, sexual orientation, ethnicity, gender, or gender identity. So in the case of someone being attacked because of an Asian background, I would put that down as race or ethnicity. While whites have historically been responsible for most hate crimes reported to the FBI, the arrest data from New York shines a light on a sensitive topic in the Asian American community, that attacks on Asians are often carried out by people of colour. Fellow people of colour, I guess Asian people are regarded as people of colour in America, aren't they? People of colour are anyone other than whites. Now, it says here that historically the whites have been responsible for most hate crimes reported to the FBI. Well, in America, white people have historically formed the majority, and they are until now still a plurality. They are the largest ethnic group or race in America, so it wouldn't be surprising that they would be responsible for the majority of hate crimes. But the majority of hate crimes carried out against Asian people, it would seem, are perpetrated by non-whites. Most police departments do not publish this kind of data, but anecdotal evidence suggests that the pattern seen in New York has emerged in other cities. So as I said, this can't be translated everywhere, but anecdotal evidence would seem to suggest this is a pattern. So last year, 7 Latinos were arrested for anti-Asian hate crimes or attacks, and 11 African Americans, of whom included a group of 4 teenage girls charged in April with hate crimes for attacking a 51-year-old Asian woman, and only 2 of the 20 people arrested last year in connection with anti-Asian hate crimes were white people, and one of them was a woman. So I thought the archetypal American racist was a gun-toting, toxic masculinity white male, but apparently the racists that go after Asian Americans in New York, at least, are mainly black people and a lot of Latinos. Why would that be? Now, is this why we're not referring to these hate crimes as racism? We're calling it anti-Asian hate because, of course, people of colour cannot be guilty of racism, because racism equals prejudice plus power. And if you are a person of colour in America, you don't have any power because you're not white. So you can't be guilty of racism, but you can be guilty of a hate crime. And most hate crimes in New York against Asian Americans were carried out by black people, apparently. Although only 20 people arrested for hate crimes against Asian Americans over the course of a year in the whole of New York doesn't seem that much to me. It's not even one a week. So maybe there isn't this explosion of anti-Asian hate crime that we thought there was. But why would it be that black people, more so than white people, are committing these anti-Asian hate crimes in New York? Well, there are a lot of black people in New York, but not as many as white people. And I think one factor we might need to consider here is the stereotype that accompanies the Asian American of being the model minority. And a lot of the benefits attributed to white people because of white privilege are also enjoyed by Asian Americans. In fact, despite being a minority, Asian American households are on average wealthier than their white counterparts. Despite encountering prejudice and discrimination, the Asian American citizen and the Asian American family are doing very well, whereas the African American citizen and the African American family are struggling. And perhaps there is an element of jealousy and envy here. Might this explain the racial abuse that Asian Americans are receiving from African Americans or black Americans? Is it some kind of jealousy? And a jealousy that white Americans do not feel. They don't need to envy the Asian Americans because they're also doing quite well. But when you're on the bottom rung of society financially, you're looking up, and you may well wonder, why is it that Asian Americans can arrive to this continent more recently and not in chains, arrive of their own volition, unlike the ancestors of the black Americans in the United States, most of them who arrived in bondage, and feel a little bit of resentment towards those people. Maybe this explains it. If you've got a better explanation of why it is, on average, black people are more racist towards Asian Americans than white people are, let me know. But I do think it is important when we try to eliminate hate from our society that we see where it is coming from and what the root causes are. Thank you for watching.